Yeah. All right, listeners, friends and family, globetrotters, earthlings, citizens. Welcome back to Leave Looking Up. This is where you're going to find uplifting conversations about the state of the world. I am your host, co-host, resident environmental futurist, Amer Jandali. And of course, I'm joined by one of my best mates, Neal Ludevig.
Hello, everyone. So great to be here with some of the most inspiring and best people I know and have recently met.
And one of those inspiring people that we have recently met and that we're super excited to talk to today is someone that I'm just like, I think the only word I have right now, Rana, is a little bit awe. I think someone that I'm in awe of. So we're here welcoming Rana Abdelhamid, who is a new friend, a new comrade, and running for New York Congress. I love how well that works. And so first of all, hi, Rana, welcome.
Hi. Thank you so much for that warm welcome and the round of applause.
The people speak.
The people speak.
That was magic. That was pretty magic.
It is a beautiful day today. It's Friday. It's Easter Friday.
Yes.
And it's sunny here. I actually just checked the temperature. What is the temperature outside? It's like 70 degrees something. It's a beautiful day.
It's beautiful.
Surprisingly the same weather here as well. Yeah.
Really?
I'm in Guatemala right now.
Neal's in Guatemala.
For the record. So it is also 70 and sunny here.
Nice.
Very nice. Beautiful day. And I'm excited for this conversation, and I'm reflecting on how the origins of this came about. Last winter, when it was not this beautiful sunny day, I remember I was at an event about advertising, Middle East representation in advertising, that was put on by a friend of mine. And one of the activities in the room at this restaurant on the Upper East Side in Manhattan was a coffee fortune-telling station. And listeners, if you know anything, if you have any Arabic friends, you know that their moms always flip the cup of coffee upside down when you're finished drinking it to track the traces of the coffee grounds on the insides of the cup. And that determines elements of your future. This was my experience, right? That I was watching this girl explain to me what was happening in my future. I don't remember because my ear was distracted and captivated by a woman on the mic that was introducing herself to the crowd and talking about her role in the political field of New York City, of New York State. And I just start hearing Rana talk, and we become friends. Next thing I know, we're texting. I feel 10 times cooler because this is happening.
I feel cool.
We all feel cool. And now we're here to learn about you as a person, learn about your campaign, learn about your heart, your visions, what's driving you forward. So that is my context setting. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, everybody. Rana, how are you doing? How's your day? What's on your radar right now? Let's start there, and then we'll dive into the stories. What's going on? How are you doing?
Well, first of all, I love that recalling of that moment because I definitely got my fortune read that night. And it was so great because my grandmother is actually the person who, when I was growing up, I remember her taking that small little coffee cup and turning it over its head on like a plate and reading our future. And so it was like, for me, like a memory of my grandmother in doing that. And it was a really special night. And I'm so glad we got to connect because it was great vibes from then. But yeah, it's a beautiful day. I've been out and about the city today, also on the Upper East Side. So I guess like I'm back on the Upper East Side, and I have just been meeting a ton of people across New York City, across the district. And the race has taken me to really be connected with people I never thought I'd be connected with, fighting for this vision for a better New York. And it's been such an incredible experience. Today is the 1-year anniversary of the campaign. We actually launched exactly a year ago.
Oh my God.
Right? Yeah, and we're about 2.5 months away from the election. So it feels really special. It feels like a special
Mm,
day.
mm. That's amazing. Congrats on the year.
Thank you. It's wild. It's wild. Exactly a year ago, I was at this restaurant called Mumbar, which is in Astoria's Little Egypt. And it's this incredible restaurant that the Chef Mustafa, is an artist. And it took him
Mm,
7 years to build the facade of the restaurant with like clay. There's like a
Mm,
huge eye of Horus on the outside and lotus flowers and just like incredible Egyptian iconography that he made. And every single piece of furniture in the store he made on his own, and he let us use his restaurant for the launch of our campaign,
mm.
and we live streamed our launch, and here we are a year later still working.
What is a launch of a campaign? What happens? What does that mean? Like what
You're absolutely right. What is that? It's like not real. What is a launch of a
what
campaign?
is
I
that?
like
What
don't even
happened? What do you is it just like a
um
texting spree or what's
yeah, I just hey, I'm running for Congress. No, it's actually a build up actually for a really long time. I was super new to the amount of labor and energy and love and vision that it would take to actually build momentum for a launch. It's almost like you are spending like anything that you launch, all the pre-production, all the time that goes into building infrastructure for whether you're launching a company or launching an event or launching a new product or a business. It's kind of similar, right? That is the
Hmm,
equivalent of it, in that you're identifying and building up staff, you are identifying and building up political support, you're fundraising before you actually launch,
hmm,
and getting commitments. Even if you're not able to take that money, you're getting commitments from people that they're going to pledge and donate to your race. You're building an entire brand, you're building a story of your campaign.
yeah.
You're getting exclusives. Our exclusive was with the New York Times. We had to figure out a venue. We had to plan an event around it. We, just setting up the live stream, like everything that's like very
Mm.
technical to everything that's very like big picture macro. Like, what is our identity? What is the story we want to tell? What are our values? What is the copy that goes on the website? Like, all of that happens pre-launch.
And
hmm.
I'm just chiming in here. I'm hearing a lot of we. Is this the royal we? Like, at what point does the royal we become an actual we? You know, when you were like, this is an idea in my head and I want to take this fruition and I need to get this person and this person. Because like you're building, like there's a movement, right?
Hmm.
There's a whole cohort. It's the Peter Pied Piper with like a parade behind you of amazing folks. How did
Yeah.
like what was the transition there?
Yeah, definitely not a royal we. I mean, from the day, so I came to this race similar to how other candidates that are new in the progressive field who are in Congress came to this race through an organization called Justice Democrats. And this is the organization that also recruited and ran people like AOC and Dr. Bowman and Cori Bush, and Ilhan Omar, people who are really leading the progressive movement within the congressional space. And it was through someone who works within Justice Democrats that approached me and was like, have you thought about running for office? That even I like
Hmm.
thought to come to this race. Um, and it was through conversations with mentors and community leaders and members of my family, small business owners. So when I say we, I literally mean
Hmm.
we. Like, I mean literally
Oui,
every
oui.
single person who donated $20 when I know they don't have it, to Chef Mustafa who let us use his space, to my incredible artist friends who were like, you could design, like, here's what the brand palette should look like for your campaign, to my dad, like literally sitting him down and like talking him through his speech on our launch day, right? Like, it was that
Oh,
all those people who were part of that initial launch. Yeah.
Had you ever thought that you would be doing this?
yeah.
Like you're
No, I mean, so I'm a movement organizer. I've been involved in community organizing, and I've been adjacent to the political world and in the political world from a movement perspective for as long as I can remember. So since I was like 14, been doing like advocacy work and
Hmm.
policy. Did I ever imagine that I would be running for Congress at 28? Absolutely not. Like, I don't know who would, you know, like you never really imagine that. And especially me growing up in all the identities that I carry as a Muslim woman, as a woman of color, as a hijab wearing, like growing up working class, like all these things. Like I never imagined someone who looks like me being in Congress. And I never imagined then myself being in Congress. And so a lot of, I think, shifts in my own assumptions of like what I'm able to do as well.
Yeah, and that's changing. I mean, I was just talking about actually this with a friend of mine, and I was saying, oh, Rana, you know, if elected, she might be the first Arab or Muslim person in local, state, or federal office. She's like, no, that's already happened. Like Hanif.
Yeah, I got elected to city council as a Muslim
Just
woman.
got elected, and like that's changing. So it's kind of an amazing thing to just even think about that transition where it's like, I never imagined someone would look like me, and it's already happening.
I know it's happening. Like she just got elected this past year. And for us, like so much of our campaign does mean so much to so many people for many reasons. One of it is that representation, right? Is to be able to see yourself. We don't have, for example, Arab representation in this city. And so from an Arab perspective, as a North African woman, as an Egyptian woman, like there are so many firsts there in New York City government at every level. As a Muslim woman, first at a federal level to represent New York City, that means a lot to people. But it also means a lot to have like a young person, right? To have someone who's an organizer, to have someone who has, there you go. I'm going to go.
Yeah, go get it.
I love it. Right on cue. Amazing.
Please do not edit this part out.
Yeah. This is the time. This is the space where we're thinking of all the worst puns to take up the space. This is where I'm bringing out my Clementine jokes.
What do you think she got? Sure. Do you think it's her takeout?
I hope it is.
Do you think it's food?
I feel like there's probably a takeout joke in here
it's
somewhere.
It's my takeout husband. It's my husband.
It's the husband. That's a good. Yeah, that's great. That's great. We want that to arrive. Do not return to sender. Stay here.
Right. I'd like to refuse this package. Yeah.
Do you remember where you were?
Absolutely not. I was saying, I remember now. I was saying that also this race is really important because it's not just about representation is deeply important, but it's also about being an organizer and coming to Congress. It's about being someone who's committed to not taking money from corporations or real estate. It's being about someone who's building in coalition. And this district hasn't seen that for 3 decades. And that is really impactful for so many communities that have not felt seen or heard by the political process in this city for so long.
You know, as you're talking about this, it's, you know, one of the things I recently talked to Amer about is this, like, what is the moment that like these kinds of that like the direction that we're going in this particular pursuit has happened. Like, do we remember those moments? And I'm curious, like, as you're talking about like all these spaces that you're seeing opportunities for growth and spaces that you want something and you want change for, was there a moment that you specifically remembered, like, this is when it clicked and it became a reality that I can pursue this, right? Like people talk to you, as you said, and said, hey, you should consider doing this, and you know, the different organizations and businesses. But I feel like there must have been a moment where it was like, okay, I'm actually doing this. Like this has to happen.
Oh my God, I feel like that. Like I feel like I'm in that moment right now. Like I'm still like, oh my God.
A year later.
It's been so fast. The past year and a half of my life, like it was November. So the interesting thing is that this all happened within the context of the pandemic. This all came to be in the context of the pandemic. And during the pandemic, so many things were going on, both like in my neighborhood, within my family, where I was just so frustrated by the reality of lack of proper healthcare infrastructure, lack of proper economic infrastructure to support working communities, especially in a place like Queens, where we were just hearing sirens all the time. Our hospitals were completely overwhelmed. Images, I'm sure you saw the images, right? Of people lining up outside of the hospitals, and there weren't enough hospitals to take people. And it was in those moments at the same time that something so beautiful continued to happen in communities across New York City, that people came together and were organizing mutual aid networks, right? Like if someone, like the days my mom was sick, she had COVID, where my family was isolating, we were taking care of my mom, people were dropping off groceries to our home because they knew we couldn't go out to get groceries. Like that was the kind of care that existed during that time. And people don't think of New York that way. Like they think, everybody's cold, nobody knows their neighbor, but that's not true. We built these mutual aid networks. We built these community fridges. We did like support for small businesses, wraparound services for folks who are experiencing housing insecurity. And it was in those moments that like the idea of we need institutional change began to really form for me. And also being called on to run, right? To be that change kept happening. But it honestly wasn't until I had that institutional support from an organization where I was like, all right, this is happening. It's like unfolding. Like this is like, if I get their endorsement, it's like a dream. And so like, I can't walk away from that.
So the endorsement was an inflection point.
Yeah.
So I'd like to orient us around that, and let's go backwards up to that, and then I want to go forwards from there. And you started laying down the groundwork about the fact that you've been involved in creating movement since you were a teen.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us more about that. Tell us more about the soil that started churning and forming from those early years, and then how it led up to that inflection point.
Yeah, I think to understand a little bit about like how I came to organizing, it's really important to understand like when I talk about Queens, like what Queens I'm talking about, right? And I think if anyone has been to Queens, they might get this a little bit. If you grew up in Queens, you definitely get this. But Queens is a type of place where we have these like ethnic immigrant hubs where it's so diverse. Like we have over 800 languages that are spoken here. We're the working class neighborhoods of New York City. There are many working class neighborhoods, but we have a lot here. And I grew up in a neighborhood where literally like you walk down the street and it's like the aunties and the uncles and you smell falafel and there's Quran blasting out of the mosque and also Amr Diab's cassette player, like, is like singing and like everybody's kind of hustling and bustling and it's really important that folks are super interconnected because like when my mom needs to pick up an extra shift to make some extra cash, like I can go to my neighbor's house, right? Or I could be at the mosque. And it was kind of the shared mutual aid structure that really allowed all of us to survive, right? And allowed all of us to get through like economic hardship, which definitely there were a lot of. And so I grew up on mutual aid. I grew up on like immigrant hustle. I grew up like in a moment where like if you needed something or if you needed someone, like people would kind of have your back, and within the context where like everyone had a lot of pride in their identity, right? Like I spoke Arabic at home, like my mom wore a abaya walking down the streets of New York City. Like that's what was up, right? And my inflection point in organizing really happened for me at the intersection of both class and growing up post 9/11 in New York.
Okay.
So it was during a time in which like all of a sudden overnight, like, I could pass as Latina in school and now everyone's like, oh, she's Arab and she's Muslim. And those are used as bad words, right? Like not in a way that's like positive. And I came to organizing really from a place of just like frustration with the way the world was perceiving me and my community, a community that I had a lot of love for and identity had a lot of love for. And so as a high school student, it was like during the time all this stuff was happening post 9/11, my community was being over policed. There was surveillance in my neighborhood and stop and frisk. And at the same time, like New York City public schools were being shut down and because they weren't performing at the rate that the government was setting, right? And like my neighborhood was being gentrified. And so it was like marching wherever I can, right? And like doing these flash mobs and doing advocacy and petitioning. And that was how I came to it, was just like in the streets, like literally at protests. when my friends and I would be like, there's a protest on this, there's this walkout, there's this, and we would just show up.
I'm wondering what was that first if you remember what that first protest was like.
Oh my God, I don't even remember. I honestly don't remember, but I do know that so much of what I do now and so much of what I'm connected, like so much of my values and like my understanding around organizing and movement work comes from my years in high school, which is like so wild to think about. That was like such a formative time. Like the organizations that I was involved with are organizations I'm still involved with. Like the people who are literally helping me build this campaign are people I met in high school who I've been organizing with since high school. But yeah, we used to literally wear orange jumpsuits and like go to like Central Park and hand out flyers to like educate people about Guantanamo. We used to like put like balloons in our stomach, like fake balloons, pretend we were pregnant to like get people to be aware about the Maternal Health Accountability Act. We would like this was what we would do. We would like when there was like a death penalty case around Troy Davis, that we would like go out and we do like these film screenings and like die-ins to try to advocate against the death penalty.
Yeah.
And these were like all the different kinds of things that we would be involved with.
What's going in my head is I'm curious, like, what are some of the core kind of emotional like undercurrent behind this? Is it frustration? Is it anger? Is it like an inspired act to change? You know, like almost identifying what is that seedling that sparked, okay, I'm going to go out. Was it, you know, did you think that at that time going out was going to make this kind of change and impact that would lead you to this path? Or it was sort of a natural, it was reactionary at that point?
Yeah, I think so. It was reactive in the sense that a huge part of my upbringing as I was growing up, like I had a lot of shame around my identity. Like I was just like, you know, I don't want people to know I'm like Arab. I don't want people to know I'm Muslim, which is like people know. Like I can't really hide that, right? People know. But I wasn't like proud. I didn't find pride in that, right? And then I remember like being surrounded by dope Muslims, dope Arabs who were older than me, who were in activism, and like reading Malcolm X was like a really big turning point. And so when I say reactive, it was like, no, I'm going to be proud. Like I'm going to wear the hijab. Like I'm going to be out here. I'm going to speak against injustice. It's not fair that my community is experiencing this. It's not fair that there is inequality. It's not fair that our schools are being shut down. It's not fair that I'm growing up in a neighborhood literally nicknamed Asma Ali, right? Like it was this kind of frustration with the reality and feeling for so long like I had no power, and then finally coming to terms with I do have power. And I can use that to create change. And I know that because people have come before me and they have used their power to create change.
And when you've been in those spaces where you felt that kind of frustration, I mean, maybe you can talk about that experience or even others. Like, what brings you from that frustrated space to that like change-making space? That I'm going to take that and channel it into like positive change and action, and almost like what gets you out of those dips, you know?
That was a really long journey. I think that was a really long journey. I think there was a moment in actually I was probably in end of college where I was like, I'm not gonna be angry anymore. Like it took me a while to be like, I'm not gonna be angry anymore. Like, because I realized that it was creating anger is really important, right? And it's important to feel anger because oftentimes like anger can be used to channel action, right? And like it allows you to feel injustice and oppression in a way that moves beyond like being passive or taking it, right? Letting yourself take it, which is the phase that I was in. But I got to a point where I was like, I need to be proactive and reframe for what I'm creating, not what I'm fighting against, but what am I for? What is the world that I want to build? And that was a lot of mentorship, a lot of guidance, a lot of reading, a lot of learning, a lot of healing spaces that I've occupied and been a part of. Where now, if you ask me like what my vision is, like I know what vision and I know what it looks like. I know what it sounds like.
It's branded.
Sounds like. It's not branded, but I know what it feels like. I know
Yeah.
what it looks like. I know what it sounds like. I know what it tastes like. And the reason is because I've occupied spaces where I've been able to be my full self and feel authentic and feel safe. And then I've also occupied spaces where I felt a complete void of safety and insecurity and trauma. And I understand where I'm trying to get to for everybody. So yeah.
And sorry, I'm all questions here. For people that might be in that space, I mean, you talked about some pretty clear resources or kind of North Stars, if you will, whether it's a mentor or a book. Is there anything that you would say for someone that's in this space and that wants to shift or transition to something, man, like how did she get from point A to point B? What would you recommend to someone that's in that space and like to channeling, and kind of channel that energy? That might be a good tool or resource for them.
Yeah, and it's hard work, right? Because there's like a lot of reasons for us to be angry, right? Especially, right now I also speak from a point of privilege. Like through my life, I went from being someone who's working class, whose family was struggling financially, to now have more access to resources, right? So there are things that have changed in my life that also changed my circumstance to be able to do this kind of work. And I know not for everybody is that reality there. I think what was really important for me, though, was to recognize and love my own community and recognize and love the people who represent the values who came before me and created change, and recognize that like I'm not alone in this fight, and people are fighting to make the world a better place, and that's beautiful, and that's really hopeful for me.
So we have this, and this is beautiful, Rana. Thank you so much just for bringing us into your story and your narrative, and your shifting contexts is something that I'm hearing. We have this wonderful woman here that is growing up in the backdrop of Queens, in a place that feels like actually a lot of the ways that you're describing resemble my memories of growing up, spending my summers in Syria, where you hear people like chatting all over the place. You hear people shouting at each other, but in like a wonderful, humbling way. The person that's around the corner making the shawarma sandwiches. You hear the Arabic, you see the adhan, you see all these different cultures. Like you have this backdrop where you're growing up. And then we have this experience where you begin noticing a sense of powerlessness. And we talk about heartbreaks turning into breakthroughs. So this feeling of powerlessness can only last a certain amount of time before that frustration breaks and cracks, and you're like, nope, I'm putting my hijab on. Nope, I'm doing this. Nope, there's this movement happening. I'm going to get behind that. I'm taking my energy and channeling it into this. And with the great resources and mindset shift that you were sharing with Neal. And then so this is all happening, and it's all culminating to, I think I'm acting, because you could be taking this energy and you could have become an author, right? You could have become, an illustrator and like created cartoons and showed like, future visions of an equitable world, just world, right? Your energy is taking you into this political sphere where you're looking at institutional change, and you're approached by an institution. You're recognized and you're invited and encouraged to step up in a certain way. Bring us there.
Yeah, so actually growing up a nerd in a working class immigrant community, I didn't have many options for what path I was going to take. It was like, you're going to be a doctor. Like that was like the expectation, was everybody thought I was going to be a doctor. And I didn't know that I actually at that time, like, didn't even know like what other options. Like, I don't think I would have ever been like, yeah, I'm going to be an illustrator, because I don't even know that that's a pathway that's viable, right? Like, I can't even see that. And it was like, and I went to college and I was pre-med for a long time, and I was doing all this work on the side. Like, people were like, what are you doing? Like, why are you living this double life? Like, you hate biology, you hate science.
I second that.
because I have to fulfill the immigrant dream. Like this is the only way, like this was kind of the path. And I remember I talk about this. I've been talking about the story a little bit more, but I haven't really before. Right before I went away to college, which was a big deal too, because I went away from my neighborhood, and that was like a whole thing. Like I grew up in a conservative Muslim community. For me to be a woman leaving my family's home pre-marriage to dorm was like a huge thing. And I remember before I left, my imam, who's amazing and incredible, like scholar, who's maybe like 70, just I learned so much from him, sat me down and was like, "What are you going to study?" And I was like, "I'm going to study political science." And he was like, "Absolutely not. You will not study political science." And he went off about how, like, again, like the political space is not built for anyone who looks like us. Like, this is what he said. Like, it's going to be difficult. You're going to be pushed out. Like, you're going to have to compromise on too many of your values, like all these things, right? It's like the political class is all about corruption and like all this stuff. And I remember leaving that and crying, like literally sobbing. I was like, my dream, like 18-year-old Rana, like just like, oh, it's over. Like I can never go into politics. It's done. Like here. And yes, absolutely. Like then I went off and studied pre-med until I failed miserably and didn't study pre-med. But it was only because I was able to really prove to myself through like external validators that allowed me to really go into this realm, which is so sad to think about. Like I needed that external validation from other institutions outside of my own community to really feel safe enough to go into this world. I never stopped organizing, but I never saw it as like, I always saw it as my life, not my career, not my profession, not what I'm going to do as a job.
When did that, oh, sorry, go on.
I think you're going to ask the same question. Go ahead.
When did that transition happen?
Yeah. And when did they approach you and when did you step up to it? What did they say?
Happened. So I did switch my major to political science and economics. And the reason was because there was this was where I was at, right? This is how my life was kind of operating. I was pre-med. There's a scholarship called the Truman Scholarship. And it's kind of like the Rhodes Scholarship. It's for public service. It's a really important validator. Like if you get it, it's like a big deal within the public service realm. And so I told my parents, the deal with my parents was like, if I get the Truman Scholarship, I'm going to switch my major. And mind you, like to get this scholarship is like, it's like it's very competitive. So I was like, I need to know, like if I can make it through this, if this organization validates me, then I'll feel like I am enough to be able to really pursue this public service space. And I went through the process and I got the scholarship. And that's when I was like, all right, so there's hope for me to actually be within the public service space. And that was that. And then I officially changed my major.
I'm really interested in hearing a little bit more about, just because I've faced it, I feel like many people have faced this conflict that exists with, like, essentially with having to have external validation to merit whether or not you can go forward in a path. And especially as someone that I think objectively and externally, you have so many accomplishments, you've started different organizations and movements, and now you're kind of on this track. What are the kind of, like, how is that experience happening with you right now? How are you internalizing that, I guess, that challenge of sometimes needing external validation, but also what seems very clear to me that, and what you alluded to earlier, is that you have a very clear North Star, your mission, your trajectory. Like when you face those things, those challenges, those barriers, talk to us about that.
Yeah, it takes a lot of faith. It takes a lot of faith. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of reflection. I think this was like, when I talk about that experience, it's early on, I think, in my journey. as a young person, really developing and coming to terms with the kind of impact that I might be able to have on the world. And mind you, at this point, you know, I've founded a nonprofit organization. I'm like doing self-defense classes across the globe. I'm literally teaching confidence building and organizing training workshops, and leading Amnesty International chapter, you know, like in the state, like all the stuff. And still, I think it's for me, the important part was always, how do I make sure that there are that I'm like rooting myself in the right things, and my intention is rooted in the right thing, so that it really is like focused and oriented around like how I can maximize my impact, right? So even when I was like in pre-med, I was like, I'm going to be an OBGYN and do maternal health, right? And it really wasn't a shift in like my mission or vision. I always wanted to do work to have impact on community and come back to my neighborhood and all this. It was just the tool that I was trying to figure out, is like, what is my tool that I'm going to be using to actually have that impact? And I think that's a journey for everyone. I think for some people, we're given the world as our potential toolbox. Like we're told, you're able to do anything, right? And you can have impact in any way. And for some people, and I think it has to do with identity and with obstacles and barriers and reality and economic status, like a lot of things, we're oriented towards more minimal options, right? And I think for me, as I went more and more in my journey, I was able to expand that world for myself in community, with validation, with support from so many people.
And then, so how did the wins start stacking up?
What do you mean?
What are those milestones? What are those milestones that's like, okay, I'm going to do this. You know, you have to, I mean, how does that even process work? Like, how does that happen? What are those milestones? And
it's so hard in this work because, you know, you think you're winning, but you're not, like sometimes, right? So for example, you probably know, right, the Arab Spring. Like I remember I was like super involved in that. Like I was like, wow, like Egyptian revolution, it's gonna be amazing, right? Like we're out here, we're organizing, like we think there's gonna be a win because there are millions of people out in the streets, and then it's like a civil war in Libya, a civil war in Syria, like closing civil society in Egypt. And then you're kind of like, man, like does movement actually work? And you're back at the drawing board. It's with Melika, right? There are moments of wins, which are really beautiful. Like when we started the National Muslim Women's Summit, and we were able to go out and like bring 50 Muslim women from across the country and bring us together to talk about organizing and talk about healing and being community. And we're at our 6th annual. Like that's a win, right? And that's what we hold on to. And then you're working on like a death penalty case, and the person, like for example, I mentioned Troy Davis earlier, and he got executed by the state of Georgia, and then that's a loss. Like it's up and down. We were building this incredible organization in our neighborhood, right, with that we called Little Egypt, New York City, doing all the small business canvassing, building out these food insecurity programs, doing a bunch of like community networking events. And then the pandemic hits and everything, you know, the levels of food insecurity are completely much higher than we ever anticipated, right? Like our small businesses are struggling even more. And then now I'm running this race, right? And so it's this work is so up and down. And at the same time, like the moments and the milestones, the wins that you're talking about are those moments where you're like in community and people really believe, right? Or you like win one case, or you mobilize one group of people, or you get one piece of legislation passed, and you have to really hold on to that, because every single other fight we know is a long-term fight.
This is actually what, again, reading that book, because it was just in there when he, like, literally Will Smith starts with this whole thing of like having to have that when he was a kid, he had to build a wall. And when he thought about the wall as a whole, it was just overwhelming from when he thought like, we're never going to accomplish this. But he's like, if we do it brick by brick and think of what we'd have accomplished and just focus on that, like I can do this brick and then the next brick and that next brick, that really reminds me of that, and kind of taking things piece by piece by piece. Yeah.
That's what this is.
I'm interested in in also understanding, because you've talked a lot about a lot of the different roles as a board member, as a community leader, as an activist, now as a campaign manager, like, you know, as a husband, as a wife. I'm so curious, how do you balance all of, like, what does the time look like?
You balance.
Just on the normal.
So I'll tell you right now that right now I'm fully focused as a candidate. Like I can't do anything else but be a candidate. But this is very new because I was working full time while also doing my candidate role until like 2 weeks ago. And so definitely finding that balance was hard. And it's really important that I'm not doing this on my own. So it is a we. I do have a team. Like I have a campaign manager. I have a call time manager. I have someone who's leading our finance, someone who does comms, right? Someone who's helping with scheduling. Like it's like a 40 plus person team that's like doing incredible work every single day with this vision for a better New York because they love New York. And that's not even counting our volunteers. Like we have hundreds of volunteers who are speaking to voters almost every single day. And I think what's been super, like the best learning for me on this campaign has been trust your team, trust the operation, and focus on what you need to focus on because otherwise it doesn't work.
It sounds like now it's really a well-oiled machine, and I'm curious, at the beginning when all this was being put together, like what were some of the hiccups? What were some of the things like, I wish if I knew what I knew now, then it was, you know. But I think every entrepreneur, every activist, like understanding what are some of the, you know, some of the things maybe that were along the way that you would tweak, or if you have a particular experience, would love to hear it.
Yeah. I want to think about a moment, but there are so many moments. Like electoral campaigns are chaos. Like every single day is like a new chaotic thing that happens because one, you're accountable to so many people at so many times, at so many moments, and two, there's like things coming out of nowhere at all times, right? Whether it's the media or like a political group or like an uncle in the neighborhood thought you should be at this event, but you didn't show up, and now they're upset, and now you have to talk them down, right? Or like you thought you were going to make X amount of money in this event and you invested a lot in it, but then no money came out of it. Or you, like, I said something in the media that I should have framed a different way, and now it's being, turned completely against me. Like, there's so many moments of that. And I would say that the biggest thing that's been kind of the most helpful thing is that I'm a relational organizer. So I come to this work really with like this idea of like, I want to build trust across the board with everyone so that we can work together most effectively. And I think this is like good advice across any entity, whether it's a business or a firm or a new startup, whatever it might be. Because then when those challenges happen, you're like, it's not that this person's like malicious or whatever. I have this layer of trust, and I know we're all going to get over it collectively. And so that has been the most important investment that I've made with my time, is like being able to do those one-on-ones and make sure that we have the relationships, because it's going to get harder as we get closer.
And you just surpassed a milestone right now, right? I understand that even just to be put on the ballot, you have to collect 5,000 signatures. So that was your first summit that you had to climb, right? Like, so you got there, you reached that milestone. And so it sounds like your formula is working.
Yeah. So there are several milestones on the campaign constantly. Political milestones, fundraising milestones, getting on the ballot was a big one. Field milestones, the number of organizers we have, the number of phone bankers we have. And we are definitely using those as marks for how effectively we're performing.
Yeah. So talk to us just about, I'm someone that's relatively new into engaging in I'm from New Mexico. I was born and raised in New Mexico, in a small town in southern New Mexico, population 70,000 people, 80,000 people. I never really had a sense of how my voice, what my role is I couldn't even tell you. I couldn't even tell you who are my district representatives, or when are the city council meetings, or like this whole sphere is just kind of mystified for me. But I am somebody that cares about social environmental change. Everything I do is to envision a world where climate solutions are normal. Everything I do is constantly walking around thinking about what would it look like if this building, if the electrons flowing through the sockets of this building are all coming from renewable energy. If like, that's it. But so like, I want to understand the political landscape. Who are the players? Who are the stakeholders? What does that look like? Like map this out for us.
And actually, you'd be happy to know that there is a New York State piece of legislation that's working on making sure that all of our buildings in New York State are electric and that we're not using non-renewable sources. And so you should definitely look at that. I think Emily Gallagher, who's the state assemblywoman or state senator in North Brooklyn, is one of the people who's leading on that. So there's definitely efforts at a local level that you should definitely look into. And you're not the only one, by the way. I'm trying to remember the exact numbers. So hopefully, inshallah, the numbers that I'm saying are not completely wrong. But I believe voter turnout in this district of registered voters was 6% in 2016. So a majority of people are not engaged. The majority of people are not necessarily out there aware, voting, right? Even though there's such a robust political infrastructure in New York City, from community board, which could get involved with things around renewable energy and the environment. For example, with the peaker plants that were being, the license for the peaker plant, the NRG plant here in Astoria, the community board and community organizations, the city council, state level representatives were a huge part of making sure that they didn't get their license renewed, so that we were forced to find a renewable option rather than having to rely on these fossil fuel plants to get our energy sources. So you're not the only one. Two, I believe it's done on purpose to demystify and make it more difficult for people to have access and to understand their true representation. And the reason is because there's so much money tied into politics, like so much corporate interest, so much funding and investment comes from real estate and from these fossil fuel companies and from these larger entities, that it's within their benefit that people are not engaged with their political process. And the other thing is because we haven't had the kind of representation like an AOC, right? Like you will know, most people will know who AOC is, right? But if I say Carolyn Maloney's name, who's the person I'm running against, most people don't know who that is, even people within the district. And it's because they don't see themselves in that kind of representation. If you have a hip Arab Muslim woman, right, representative in New York,
could that be?
you know who that is. Like, I will promise you will know who that is, right? Like, there's no way you wouldn't. Like, you know me as a candidate, and I'm not even a representative yet, right? Then I'm pretty sure, like, most people who share parts of my identity know who I am in this city, and I'm not even in that seat yet. And that is why representation matters so much. I remember a couple of years ago, I was speaking with an elected who was like the first Korean American elected in New York. And they're like people, and they're in Queens. And they were like, people call from, or I was learning about their story, people call from the Bronx who are Korean American for help on stuff because they feel seen in that representation. And so there's many reasons why someone like you, who's highly engaged, who's super educated, right, who's entrepreneurial and young and tapped into so many social spaces in New York City, would be not involved with such an obvious social space or political space to get connected to on issues that you care about. There's just too many barriers.
So what do I need to know as, so I'm a person, I'm in this apartment building, I'm in Crown Heights. What's that sphere? What's that scope? So like, I'm an individual. What's the big next sphere of representation? And then the next sphere is representation. Like, can you just demystify that? Can you just, what are the systems that I'm nested in? Where am I?
Okay, first of all, you have
you're here.
You have the most dope city council member who just got elected.
Okay.
Crystal Hudson, Crown Heights. You should look her up. She's amazing.
So is Crystal, is she the next one up from an individual? Is that the next level of?
No, it's a little complicated. So I also don't know. I'm also new to electoral politics, but here's what I'll tell you. My understanding is there's you as an individual, then there's the Democratic Party, right, in New York, which mostly has most power because it's a very democratic state, democratic city, New York City. I don't want to say state. And so you have a district leader, you have state committee leaders who are representative, who engage with the Democratic Party at a county level in Brooklyn. You have your city council member, you have your state assembly member, you have your state senator, you have your borough president, and then you have your congressional member. Borough president, and then I would say maybe like comptroller. You have your mayor, you have your congressional member, you have your senator. So these are kind of the layers of representation that you might have. There's also a community board that's in your neighborhood, probably. If you have kids in public school or if you're connected to your school system, there's the Community Education Council. If you care about education issues. Yeah.
And so for folks that want to get more engaged and learn more, and what would you say the next step that someone like an Amer, like a myself, that's like, hey, we're super interested. I mean, I remember the process when I had to do this for Harlem Arts Festival, which was like Uptown Manhattan, talking to the borough president. But I had a lot of people clinging, oh, you should talk to this person, talk to this person. Like, what is the next step for the average human that's like, I care about things. And what do I do with all these cares? Where can I go? Right.
So, I'm not a person who thinks that electoral politics is the only way. I think electoral politics is part of it, right? And I think if someone's interested in getting involved in electoral politics, there are a lot of Democratic clubs across the city as well that are easy ways for people to plug in. And I will tell you that Democratic clubs across New York City, I hope no one gets offended that I'm about to say this, are in dire need of younger, more diverse presence and voices, which over the past couple of years have increased a lot of engagement from local community, which is really beautiful. And so I highly recommend that people do get involved with their Democratic club and figure out what their Democratic club might be, especially if it feels aligned with your values. There's the community board. Anyone could apply to be on their community board. You could go to your community board meetings. Those happen regularly, and you can learn about the issues happening in your local community. And then city council, you definitely follow your city council member. You can follow them on Instagram or Twitter, follow your state senator, follow your state assembly person. They usually host events at their offices about things that are going on. There's a process called participatory budgeting, where literally city council members are giving out $1 million to community initiatives. It's a really great way to get involved. And the other thing I'll say selfishly too is getting involved on campaigns. Like if there's a candidate that you are excited by, that you would like to see represent your community, then that's a really great way to build networks, learn, cut your teeth in the political process, and build community. Yeah.
Hell yeah. Where you at? You got what dude, this is like, yo, my gears are turning big time. Where are you at, Neal?
You're like up for your community board, I hope. I see you taking notes. You're like,
yeah. I'm looking up District 35. I'm looking up District 36. I'm looking up who these people are. This is great. So I want to also can you keep opening us up to us a little bit about the vocabulary here? Just what is this? What is the language that we should understand? Last time we talked, you mentioned the Gini coefficient, which is a measurement of inequality. You just told us about participatory budgeting. What are some concepts, some language that people need to know and people need to understand in order to measure success and measure change and improvements?
One of the metrics that I've been talking about a lot, if I were to give you a metric, is this metric. I care a lot about housing justice because I believe that New York City is an amazing place. And it is a very expensive place and very inaccessible space for so many people. And as someone who grew up and experienced gentrification and has seen gentrification of her neighborhood, I care a lot about affordable housing. Okay. So there is a metric, if you want to learn a metric of the day, called average median income. Okay, this is a metric that developers use and community board uses, and city council council members, borough presidents might use to think about what actual affordability can look like in a community. The problem with this metric is it uses median income, which, as we know, right, we all know math. When you look at an average, oftentimes if there's higher numbers in an average, it will skew that number higher than it should be. This stat is not hyper localized. So, for example, a place like Queens, our income is calculated with a place like Westchester, which we know a county in Westchester has much higher incomes than a place in Queens. So it pulls up the median income. This is how you get an apartment that is affordable in a place like Long Island City. That's a 1-bedroom. That's like $2,750, right? So you're like, how is a 1-bedroom affordable if it's $2,750? And the developer made an agreement with the city, getting some sort of tax break, that he's building or she's building affordable units, but the units are not actually affordable, right? They're like, we're gonna keep it at X% AMI. The building ends up being way more expensive, or the housing becomes way more expensive than it should be. That is a metric that could be changed at a federal level. It would have huge implications for how we do urban development and urban planning. That's my fun fact.
I love it. I actually read in an article that you were talking about how basically the connection with the climate crisis and a housing crisis. And I'd love you to dive a little bit more into that, about how they're connected and why housing is such a fundamental thing. Because I think for a lot of candidates, and I think for just anyone finding that like foundational belief that's going to leak into everything else, it sounded like it was housing, and I kind of wanted to hear that connection and why you think it's just so important beyond that.
And if, as you respond to that too, if you could also start letting us into your campaign. Yeah. What does your platform look like, and what does your vision look like?
Yeah, this is all interconnected because housing justice is definitely core to my platform. Climate justice is core to my platform. And when I talk about housing justice, it's also racial justice. It's also gender justice. It's climate justice. I grew up, like I said, in a neighborhood literally nicknamed Asma Alley. Oftentimes, housing and the way urban planning happened historically in New York City, you have working class immigrant neighborhoods relegated to parts of the city where we're more vulnerable to toxicity, toxic air, like in the case of Astoria and the peaker plants. And for me, the prime example, there are two examples that we could think of actually from the past year that are really devastating and heartbreaking of how climate justice is interconnected with housing justice, is Hurricane Ida, where we saw people literally die in their basement apartments in Queens, over a dozen people, because there was so much flooding that happened. The climate resilient infrastructure wasn't there. So we haven't invested in making sure that homes are safe from flooding, one. And two, people can't afford to live and have to find these alternative forms of housing. So they live in basement apartments, which I partially grew up in a basement apartment, right? And these basement apartments are not equipped to deal with the climate crisis. And so people literally were stuck in their homes when they flooded and passed away because of that. Then you also saw the Bronx fire, right? Where, again, our buildings are not equipped to deal with these extreme weathers, the extreme cold. People didn't have heat in their home. And we're bringing space heaters into their home as the only alternative in the middle of a New York City winter. And that's how you had a fire happen in this Bronx building in a low-income neighborhood in the Bronx. And so when I talk about climate justice as housing justice, that looks like retrofitting all of our buildings. It looks like making sure that we're investing in renewable energy sources so we're not reliant on fossil fuels to heat our homes, right? We're not reliant on fossil fuels to make sure that we have the energy to have our homes keep running. But it also means that when there is a hurricane, like Hurricane Sandy or like Hurricane Ida, that people don't have to have mold in their home for 5 years because they're not receiving the federal funding to get that mold removed, which is literally what has happened in this district. And that is what that looks like for me. So it's both being proactive and preventative in the types of investment, and being quick in how we're reacting to the harms of the climate crisis.
Mm.
You're gonna see our gears turning a lot. This is yeah. This is what happens.
I'm reflecting on two different things, and I'm thinking about how they're connected. I mean, the first is, I mean, so where I lived in New York City for more than 10 years was in Harlem, where a tremendous amount of displacement and shifting and gentrification was happening. And I'm curious. I think for me, as someone who's an artist and someone who's a community builder and someone who a lot of that experience, I mean, there was an old colleague of mine that she actually talked about displacement being or gentrification really being displacement, and that it was social displacement, it was financial displacement, it was physical displacement, right? It was either being priced out of the homes because there just wasn't enough there, you just didn't have enough money. It was physically being displaced because there just wasn't enough properties there, and there was social displacement, which is essentially communities changing and shifting. And this is obviously a lot of what like AOC talks about, and that was sort of the crux of my work, which is making sure that even as a community shifts and changes, there's still that feeling that people that created the community and were the culture of the community, and you've alluded to so much about this. How rich Queens is in terms of its culture and its vibe. I'm curious, as you're thinking about that, and as someone that is a music lover and a poetry lover, how is your campaign, and sort of how are your values kind of thinking about ensuring social displacement doesn't take place, or kind of thinking about ways to really protect that, especially as because it's such a vital part of and connect, in terms of connecting with the housing crisis and a lot of different things. I'm just curious, how do you see that connecting with these other important passions of yours?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And all of that is in many ways interconnected. Like when people talk about gentrification, there's beautiful writing about like the loss, right? And the kind of the ongoing grieving and mourning when a community is disrupted, when a community is displaced. And I remember a piece, I can't remember attribute an author in this moment, but just like of what someone walking through their neighborhood and like seeing it change day by day, and like almost feeling a part of them is being lost, right? A part of their memory is being lost. And I really resonate with that because that is kind of the reality of me still living in Astoria, having grown up here and seeing so many small businesses shut down, seeing so many other institutions come up, seeing luxury high-rise developments go up. When people used to live there and now they live, in Texas because they can't afford to live in New York anymore. That is the ongoing grieving process. And I think the way in which we make sure that communities and their histories are preserved is by making sure that we are allowing for institutions like commercial real estate, right? And small businesses, which are oftentimes the crux of these communities, like community organizations and cultural institutions, like actual people's homes and residences, right? People are actually able to stay if they want to stay. And that requires things like national rent control for both commercial and residential rent. That requires things like actually recognizing the history, right, of a community and honoring that the presence of that community through celebration, through amplification. And there's so much organizing happening across this district that does that kind of that is rooted in those kinds of efforts to memorialize and to recognize and to sustain that cultural resilience when it's being confronted with so much economic shifts, because it happens so quickly, and you need like both community protectors and you need policy to intervene in the face of like such incredible amounts of money that is flooding these neighborhoods that create these shifts.
Yeah.
Rana, thank you for opening up like this to us, and thank you for taking us on this journey where we've gotten to know high school you, frustrated you, activist you, mobilized you, touched and inspired you. And I want to acknowledge the through line that we've been hearing that is present throughout this entire narrative and this entire story of your experience, and how it's leading us to what I was actually asking for earlier, into higher scopes of influence, greater scopes of influence. And I'm seeing that radical meaning from the root, that through line that began in a radical form, and now it's blooming into this amazing flower. What's your favorite flower?
Sunflowers.
Blooming into this beautiful sunflower, and you just got the 5,000 votes that you need to get on the ballot. You're moving now to continue expanding your reach. We're going to get you that win. To close, what does it look like when you win? What can we expect to start seeing happen? What levers are you going to pull in social environmental change, especially as it relates to the climate crisis? What are we going to start seeing?
Yeah. So there are pieces of legislation that I'm super excited about that really have been informed by the work of grassroots activists and organizers and communities that are disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis. One is called the Thrive Agenda, which builds on the Green New Deal and includes both the creation of job opportunities and also providing federal subsidies and funding and research to actually increase the source and opportunity for us to rely more heavily on renewable energy as opposed to fossil fuels and as opposed to natural gas and things of that sort. So that's a really important piece of legislation. There's the Green New Deal for public schools. There's the Green New Deal for public housing. These are all pieces of legislation that are really important to our campaign. I talked about national rent control. We need to make sure that people aren't waking up and having to pay 30% more in rent over like the course of 2 days, and they had no idea about it. And now they're paying $800 more. They can't stay in their apartment when over 80% of this district are renters, right? Like we should be able to live in New York City without having to worry about that. I'm super excited to have really fire constituency services, organizing hub offices in our district where people could come in and feel creative and also get the energy and resources that they need, both in terms of community, in terms of information, in terms of counsel, and in terms of federal resources that are offered and awareness, so that there isn't this lack of understanding of what resources they actually have access to. So these are some things that I'm excited to completely focus on and hit the ground running on.
Are you going to turn your headquarters into a co-working space?
We should. It should be an organized
freaking
I want
G.
Bring people. That's how it should be. Like people should be excited to come into the space. It should be open to the community. Yeah.
Gail Brewer kind of had that. Like people would drop in all the time uptown, and it was awesome. And that's such an awesome way to engage and bring people in and connect to different kinds of audience, people.
Exactly.
Yeah. I have one question before, Amir, if you have any others, feel free before we get to our rapid fire round. You just get ready for it. It's going to be great. There's a great organization that we sort of take a cue from, the 747 Club. They do these dinners with this guy Chris Schember it's very heavily entrenched in the importance of gratitude, and unrecognized gratitude. And I'm wondering, and we often like asking, is there someone, because you talked about so many of the influences and mentors, is there someone that today or in kind of like in recent memory that you would want to give thanks to, that helped you get here, or is inspiring to, that you haven't given thanks to yet, that isn't on your purview? or hasn't been there that you think, wow, like
So
this
many
person.
people. So
I
many
know,
people.
exactly. And that's why I'm just asking for one
I can't
person.
even give you one, but you know what? This is the person I'll mention today. I'll mention my friend Carolina, who's someone who is an incredible anti-gun violence activist and organizer, who has just been super helpful with this campaign, but also just a grounding force for me throughout this entire process. And I feel a lot of gratitude towards her for teaching me every single day.
We're going to have to give a shout out
Carolina.
to, yeah, Carolina.
Thank you,
Definitely.
Carolina.
I'll tell her today too that I shouted her out.
Amazing. So the rapid fire round is the last bit of this. What Amer and I are going to trade back and forth. We're going to ask you some quick questions. And you have 5 seconds or less to give your gut quick response to it, whatever it might be. There are no wrong answers. There are just quick answers. And that's what we're looking for. So we're just going to ask a few before we sign off today. And thank you so much for this the incredible time you've given us.
No way.
Yalla, Rana, yes. On this day of Ramadan, what is your favorite drink?
Hibiscus. Kerkede
Ooh.
hibiscus.
Kerkede? Oh my gosh.
I'm going to have to try that.
I'm so Egyptian. I can't.
When are you most productive?
In the morning.
Okay. Who is your biggest inspiration?
Ooh, my mom.
Okay. Either or, summer or winter?
Summer.
What's your magic number?
Oh wow. I don't know why 13 popped in my head, but I don't feel some type of way, but 13. There you go. It's my magic number.
Okay.
I think I know the answer to this, but in which subject were you worst at in school?
Oh my god, what subject was I worst at? Oh, should I say? I mean, organic chemistry was like my worst life ever, and physics, science.
I heard you say biology before, and I was like, it's definitely going to be science related.
And so, which was your best?
Social studies, history.
What scares you?
Oof. Oh my god, this is not rapid fire. What scares me? Oh my god, so much right now. What scares me? I think like letting people down scares me.
Yeah, I would have said scorpions, but I think that's a really good answer too. If you could live anywhere else in the world, if you could live anywhere in the world, other than Queens, where would it be?
Queens. Can I say Manhattan? No. Outside of New York.
Loyal, yeah, outside of New York.
I love it.
New York. Let's keep it outside of New York. If I could live anywhere else in the world outside of New York, it would have to be Alexandria, Egypt.
Oh, damn, there.
Sick.
Fantastic response.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's it.
We've come to the conclusion of this very
Exactly.
I love it. Rana, thank you so much for sharing some wisdom and inspirations and ideas and thoughts and motivations here. I'm leaving looking up after this conversation on a Friday. So thank you so much. And it's an utter pleasure to connect in this way and to hear all this.
Thank you. Yeah. And I'm going to keep looking up too. Thank you both.
I'm leaving looking towards the Thrive agenda. I'm looking at community boards, district leaders, borough presidents. I'm thinking about comptrollers, and I'm just this whole thing has got me jazzed in a way for all of us to learn how to amplify our social impact and environmental impact. So thank you very much, Rana. Best of luck with everything, and we're behind you all the way.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you both so much. I really appreciate it.
And if people want to find out more information about you and what you're doing and all of the incredible initiatives you're spearheading, where can they do that?
At ranaforcongress.com. So RANAFOR Congress.com.
Amazing. Cool.
And our
Well,
final
thanks so
send-off,
much. A final send-off.
the invitation to leave looking up.
Oh, we'll do that afterwards.
Oh, okay. Then any other final send-off?
Final words. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you all so much. Please get involved, volunteer, be part of the campaign.
I'm actually going door knocking tomorrow, so that's.
You're the best. Ah, amazing. I'm so
Man.
grateful. So grateful.
Cool. All right. That's the cue music. So we can dance our way into the weekend. I love how